I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died, the night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off, no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies. 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone. "Come on, Red, we need your experience out there. What could go wrong?" I didn't laugh. Not this time. So, there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding road snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. "Red, you still with us?" Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. "Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow." Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, just barely visible through the fog, was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it, but there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. "Pete, you see that truck up ahead?" Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. "There's no truck, Red. Just us." I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front, it wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area, but as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old, real old. The kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore, and then it hit me, hard and fast. The paint job, the faded red stripe down the side, the same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. "No," I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be. Marty's truck was gone, destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. "Red, you good back there?" Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice shaky. "Just seeing things." But I wasn't seeing things, not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening. The curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again, but this time it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. "Red, you gotta help me." The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me. I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead, gone. But that voice, it was his, down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference, but the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear, but there was nothing, just the thick, swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop. Let the fog clear." "Negative, Red. We've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road. The old rusted cab, the faded red stripe, it was Marty's rig, no doubt about it. But when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fish-tailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady, my heart pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw Marty's truck." Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. "Marty didn't make it, Red. It wasn't Pete, it wasn't Jerry, it was Marty." His voice filled the cab clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty. You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrails through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real. It's the mountains messing with you." "Messing with me?" I snapped back. "You hear him too, Pete? Don't act like you don't." Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it. The same curve where Marty had gone over, the same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? "Marty, I'm sorry," I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. "I'm so damn sorry." The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck idling in the middle of the road, blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second, and my rig skidded, the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing. and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "Red." Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. "You still with us?" "Yeah," I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. "I'm still here." The mountains stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind, and I knew, in some way, he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I, we had a falling out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job. No questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well. But now my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. "Jack!" The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. "Jack, help me." I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is this?" No answer, just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again, this time clearer, like the static was peeling away. "Jack, why didn't you come back?" I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who'd drowned 6 years ago in that accident, the accident I'd been running from ever since. "Get a grip, Slick," I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be. Just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blue, flickering, just off the edge of the road where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog, but these lights weren't moving. They hovered, low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. "Jack, why didn't you come back for me?" The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop it," I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. "You're not real." But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the CB, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. "You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown." The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I'd tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea. And now, here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing, the hum from the trailer growing louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive, something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them, watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear, "Come back, Jack." The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing, it wasn't just cargo. It was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated. And among them, I saw Dave. His eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. "You left me," his voice echoed in my head. "You left me to die." I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift. And then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet, but the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me, not yet, and neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business. Just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert, dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit. The kind of tired that sneaks up on you, where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally, I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock, 3:15 a.m., and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. When I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead, I felt a wave of relief. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. I've been around long enough to know that. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing in through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep, and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff. No names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me harder inside. That same rotten stench, only stronger. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go, but the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold. Too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone. Just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. "Frank?" My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. "Who is this?" Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. But when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. "Come on," I muttered, trying to stay calm. "Don't do this to me now." I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. No bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out of here, on foot if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat, just in case, and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else. On the side of my truck, etched into the paint, was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building, the carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. "Frank." I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures, no man in the coat. Just the voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Frank, you need to stay." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it. Low, urgent, voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand. But they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave. Now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered. And I knew, deep down, that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore, not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while, the hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Ben Grady, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking's simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I'd picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick-suited guy, one of those corporate types, barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No stops, no questions. I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate, too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce, well, you don't say no to easy money. Now, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses, but otherwise, it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway. Nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road. But something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it, just keep driving. Get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. That's the plan, Bear. Simple. But then the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First, the cab was freezing, then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs, they're built to last, but every now and then something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in, but as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it. A soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing. Probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there. But heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops, no questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again, and I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Ben," a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. The voice on the radio, though, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. "Who the hell is this?" The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. "Ben, you need to stop." I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank. Someone screwing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast, but that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer, but all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its tail lights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound, like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted. Maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first. Not the musty smell of old cargo, but something far worse. A stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty. But then I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, hunched in the shadows, was a figure. It was humanoid, but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall, its back to me, but I could hear it breathing, shallow and rapid. "What the?" I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned. Its face, if you could call it that, was a mess of raw, red flesh, eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened in a wet, gaping maw, and I heard a low, guttural hiss escape its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me, each step punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely get it secured. The thing inside let out a shriek, a sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What had they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, get away from here. But I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hand shaking. "This is Ben Grady. I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. "I need help. There's something in my trailer." Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. "Ben, you need to stop." My voice, clearer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifting into gear and pulling back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore, just away. Away from that thing, away from whatever nightmare I'd gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder, my breath visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. "Ben, it's too late." I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking, the engine sputtering as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down, like whatever was inside was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped. Dead in the middle of the highway, the engine cut out, the lights flickering before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled. Something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in. But I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer, no sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. There's a peace you find on the road, late at night, when the only thing lighting your way is your own headlights slicing through the dark. No noise, no distractions, just you, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. That's why I love it. Out here, there's no mess, nothing like the life I left behind, just the road. My name's Lucas Turner, but most folks call me Lucky. It's an old nickname from when I used to get myself out of sticky situations, both on and off the road. I guess I've lived up to it, though I've never been one for superstition. If you stay calm and keep moving forward, things usually work out. But that night, on Route 2, the nickname didn't feel so fitting anymore. I'd left Seattle earlier that day, hauling a load of electronics to some distribution center in North Dakota. A long stretch of mostly empty highway lay between me and the drop-off, but I didn't mind. It was a quiet night, just the way I liked it. No cars, no people, just the stars overhead and the empty plains around me. The deeper I drove into Montana, the quieter it got. Nothing but the hum of my rig and the occasional flicker of static on the CB. But somewhere along that desolate stretch of US Route 2, the static changed. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It started to sound like something trying to break through, a faint voice hidden in the distortion. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear it up, but all I got was more static. After a few minutes, the voice faded, and I figured it was just some distant radio chatter from a passing trucker. I wasn't tired yet, but I was getting there. I hadn't slept much since the divorce, and nights like this, long, quiet, always gave me too much time to think. Sometimes you drive to outrun what's on your mind. Problem is, it's always waiting for you when you stop. Just as I was about to switch the CB off and turn up my music, the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer, a low monotone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 7052, it said, repeating the numbers slowly, like it was reading coordinates. I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "This is Lucky Turner, eastbound on Route 2. You got a copy?" Nothing. Just static, then the voice again, quieter this time. 7052. You need to stop. I frowned, the words sending a chill through me. I hadn't heard anyone nearby on the CB all night, so where the hell was this coming from? I glanced at the GPS out of habit, but it showed nothing unusual, just the straight road ahead. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the same numbers came through again, but this time, it wasn't just numbers. Lucas. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road so fast the rig shuddered beneath me. The voice had said my name. I cut the engine, my heart racing. The radio was dead silent now, nothing but the low hum of static, like the voice had never been there at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm down. It had to be some kind of weird signal bounce, maybe from a nearby base, old military broadcasts or something. That happens sometimes out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped out of the cab, needing to clear my head, and breathed in the cold, crisp night air. The road was dead empty, nothing but flat plains and dark woods on either side. No headlights, no signs of life. I walked around the truck, stretching my legs, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced down the road, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another trucker, but the lights didn't seem to be moving. They just sat there. I watched for a minute, waiting for the truck to approach, but it never did. The lights stayed exactly where they were, flickering slightly in the dark. Something about them didn't feel right. It was like they were watching me. "Don't be an idiot, Lucky," I muttered to myself, climbing back into the cab. But as I settled into the driver's seat and fired up the engine again, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still there, even as I pulled away. I pushed the truck hard, wanting to put some distance between me and whatever was behind me, but the farther I drove, the more the radio interference grew. It was subtle at first, just little bursts of static, but then it got louder, and within that static, I could hear it again. Lucas, 7052. I checked the mirrors, heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw the convoy. 3 trucks, old military rigs by the look of them. They were in a tight formation, following about 100 yards behind me. I hadn't passed them on the road, hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere. They were just there, like they'd appeared out of nowhere. My grip tightened on the wheel. I had 2 options: stop and let them pass, or keep going and pretend like nothing was wrong. My gut told me to keep going. But no matter how fast I drove, the trucks stayed right behind me, their headlights burning bright in the dark. And that voice, Eddie's voice, kept slipping through the static on the CB. "You need to stop, Lucas." I slammed my fist on the dashboard, adrenaline surging through me. This couldn't be real. Eddie was dead, had been for years, and yet his voice kept coming, clear as day, telling me to stop. I passed a small sign on the roadside. Deadwood Ridge, 2 miles. 2 miles. That's where the voice had been leading me. 7052. It was a set of coordinates. Coordinates that pointed directly to Deadwood Ridge. I didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible. But the voice, Eddie's voice, had a pull I couldn't shake. Something was waiting for me there, something I had to face. When the turnoff for Deadwood Ridge appeared, my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the exit, the old narrow road winding through thick trees, and as soon as I turned, the convoy behind me vanished. Just like that. Gone. The road twisted and turned, narrowing with every mile, until I came to an old gate, rusted, broken, hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, hidden in the woods, I could see the remains of an old military base, abandoned, decaying, like something out of a nightmare. I cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air. The place was silent, the only sound the wind whistling through the trees. My gut told me to leave, but my feet kept moving, pulling me toward the base. Inside the fence, I found an old radio tower, its rusted skeleton still standing against the night sky. At the base of the tower, there was a small building, just a single room, the door hanging open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the broken concrete, and that's when I saw it. An old military radio still running, its dials glowing faintly in the dark. The static from the CB was coming from here, filling the room with that same eerie hum I'd heard on the road. And then, from the radio, Eddie's voice again. "Lucas, it's time to stop." The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt something behind me, something watching. I turned, and there he was, Eddie, standing in the doorway, just as he'd been the day he died. His eyes hollow, his face pale, his expression blank. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eddie?" He didn't respond, just stared at me, unmoving. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words choking out of me. "I should have been there. I should have..." Eddie's face twisted, his mouth opening in a silent scream, and suddenly the radio exploded in a burst of static. The air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, and I staggered back, my pulse racing. "Lucas!" Eddie's voice rasped from the radio, distorted and wrong. "Stop! Now!" The lights in the building flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, Eddie was gone. The radio was silent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I bolted out of the building, ran back to the truck, and peeled out of there as fast as I could, the engine roaring as I tore down the road. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirrors. I just drove. When I finally got back on Route 2, the radio was silent. No static, no voices, just the empty road and the stars overhead. I never did figure out what happened that night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something else. But I know one thing. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling me to that place, it's something best left alone. Some things, once you hear them, never stop echoing. I never wanted to take the job, not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to. Even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened, saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. Never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward. Keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route. Route 163, through the heart of Monument Valley, and then up through Dead Man's Pass. The very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rock stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first. Static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, Those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago. No reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be, of course. Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same, and it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life, and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you gotta stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew fainter, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you gotta stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it!" I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. And then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered. And standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow. But it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see. "Eddie?" My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you?" He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. And then, slowly, he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered. This can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running. I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped." The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. "I never blamed you, Rusty," his voice whispered, softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. "But you gotta forgive yourself." The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady. As I pulled back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled, a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running. Time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last. But something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70, heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm that was building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy McAllister. Bones, to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter, Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. "Shit," I muttered, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit whirring and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed. The kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping. No, Not tapping, scratching. It was coming from the crate. A large wooden crate, strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there, but my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted, just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it, not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B. No questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought. Some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then, through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days. That's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People, walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long flowing dresses, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched, hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again. Then came the knocking. Loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened, with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand, but one voice stood out. One voice I knew. Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway, faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust I could see them again. The figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen on the road before, long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her. Carol. Standing in the middle of the road, her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig careened off the road, the trailer jackknifing as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm had passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal, no way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol. Walking slowly toward me, her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. Roy, she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. It's time to come home. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting, as the darkness closed in around me. The last dispatch.